All right. So in training evaluation, we're talking about how we can evaluate whether the training was effective or not. It's not being evaluated in training. This is a flip side. So it's not feedback. This is how do we determine whether the training was effective or not. So one strategy is to follow what's called Kirkpatrick's taxonomy. So Kirkpatrick says we should look at the R, which is the reaction criteria. And that's really the trainees' attitudes, like how they've changed, how they've been affected by the training. The L in Kirkpatrick's taxonomy is the learning criteria. How much did they learn? Probably going to have to assess that through some kind of quiz or something to assess that. The B in his taxonomy is the behavioral criteria, and that would be on the job changes that occur following the training. And then we've got the results criteria, and I put it down as a value. So how much of a value is this to the company? Was it worthwhile? Was there enough behavioral change and attitude change? Did they learn enough to make it worthwhile to continue on with this training program? Correlations among the reaction criteria and learning criteria, reaction criteria and behavioral criteria, reaction criteria and results criteria. The correlations among these four things range from 0.6 to 0.63. That's pretty good, right? So, if you're high on reaction criteria, you're probably high on learning criteria. If you're low on reaction criteria, so maybe the attitudes don't change, you tend to also be low on learning criteria and so on. Those are pretty high correlations. So that it looks like they kind of all go together. They're kind of a package deal almost. If you get one, you tend to get the others. Now, Allinger and colleagues thought we need to update Kirkpatrick's taxonomy. And so we're going to mostly copy what they said and make a couple changes. So they called it reactions, and they talked about affective reactions. So like these emotional attitudes, maybe you would call it, right? And then also utility reactions. So whether they feel like their attitude about the usefulness of the training changes or not. So maybe they went into the training thinking, this is stupid. I don't know why I'm wasting a day doing this. And after they got done, they're like, I learned a couple things. Like that was useful. I'm going to use that. Do they have those kinds of reactions? Oh, we still have an L. But they said, you know what? There are three types of learning. It's not just learning, three types of learning. So their immediate knowledge, so maybe a quiz that they took as part of the training. Knowledge retention, maybe we should give them a test again 6 months later and find out if they still are holding this information that they were trained. And then behavior and skill demonstration. They didn't really time constrain this quality of learning. They were just arguing that it's like different than cognitive knowledge, being able to produce a behavior, be able to produce a skill. So they thought it was worth noting that there are three types of learning. Okay. Oh, we still have a B, so that's good. This one, and they even kept the same total name, behavioral criteria. They said behavioral criteria is the same thing as transfer, positive transfer. So they just wanted to qualify that and say it's just, you gave it a name, called it by behavioral criteria. I'll keep the name and I will clarify that that's the same thing as transfer. The correlations among these three, and then you'll leave out the ultimate value to the company. I guess it's not worthwhile for Allinger and colleagues to worry about whether the bottom line, right? These are not, the way that they defined it and the way that they measure, those things do not correlate with each other as well as the things that are on Kirkpatrick's taxonomy. Now, Allinger and colleagues say, well, you know what? That's good because that means we're tapping into separate things. These are what we would call independent characteristics on the augmented framework. Whereas on the Kirkpatrick's taxonomy, there's a lot of overlap between these different kinds of criteria that they listed. So I don't know. Pick the one you like better. I'm not arguing in favor of either one. I'm just telling you that they exist. I'm Switzerland. All right. Evaluation designs for evaluating the effectiveness of your training. There are quasi-experiments. You guys, I've already introduced that concept to you, but this is the most viable alternative for the evaluation of training programs, because we can't really control all variables of interest. So we're probably going to be doing a quasi-experiment, not a true experiment. So one way that we can do it, and this is really, really probably the most common way to do it, is a pre-post design. So before they start the training, we administer some kind of assessment of whatever the criteria is. So for those of you who are a psych major, when you take Psych 309, you take a test in that is not part of your class. It's a very long, covers everything in psychology, multiple choice test. That's actually the pre-test in our training evaluation that we are doing to make sure that the training program that we are providing to our psychology majors is adequate. So you take that pre-test in Psych 309. If you are a BA in psychology major, you take the post-test in Psych 413. If you're one of the other two majors, you never see that test again. So sorry about that. That's the way it's designed. But so the people who are bachelor's, BAs in psychology, you got the pre-test in 309 and you take the post-test in 413. And what we're looking for is change. We're looking to see that a person is scoring higher on that test after they've had their training. By the time you take 413, you've had a lot more psychology training than you do before you take Psych 309. And so we're looking for change. And it may not be individually, because people can take classes out of order and things like that, and we know that. But we can kind of look at the pre-test scores and compare them to the post-test scores and make the argument that our training is causing your knowledge of psychology to grow. That's the design. It's a pre-test, post-test design. It's a quasi-experiment. All right, so in this little box I'm showing you here, we've got the pre-test, we've got the post-test, we've got the training in the middle, right? In a pre-test, post-test design with a control group, we have a pre-test, we have a training that some people get and some people don't, and then we have a post-test. Yeah, there we go. So some of the, oh, hold on. Okay, that's not what I thought was going to happen. Sorry. It's always fun to be surprised by my own slides. So the experimental condition, what I thought was going to happen was we were going to get little X's in places, but apparently I did not put that in there. The experimental condition is going to take both conditions are going to take the pretest. The experimental condition gets the training, and then both groups take the post-test. This helps us to make sure that it's not something else out in the world that is causing a change on the post-test score other than the training. In the situation where we give you a post-test, everybody gets trained, and then you take a post-test, there's the possibility that it's not the training that was important. It was something else that everybody experienced that had nothing to do with our training. Maybe everybody saw something on TV. I don't know. And so by having this kind of control group, this pre-test, post-test design with a control group, we have one group that doesn't get trained. And what we're hoping is not only that the pre-test score will be different from the post-test score for the experimental condition, but that the post-test score for the experimental condition will be different from the post-test score for the control group because they didn't experience training. So that's another way to test the efficacy of training. There's a Solomon 4 group design. This is costly, but it's a really strong research design. So you end up with 4 independent groups in a Solomon 4 group test. You have those who got trained and those who took a pre-test. You have those that did not get trained but took a pre-test. You have those who did not take the pre-test but they got trained. And you have those who didn't get trained and they didn't take a pre-test. 4 different groups. And what the Solomon 4 group design will do for us is it will hopefully reveal that those who took the training have different scores from those who didn't take the training, and that people who took the pre-test don't score differently from the people who didn't take the pre-test. Like, what we want to make sure is that the pre-test isn't actually causing your knowledge, right? That the pre-test isn't somehow tainting you. And so this design allows us to take out training, take out pre-testing, and see what seems to be causing any differences that might exist. Hopefully, the only thing that emerges is that training is what's causing the difference on the final test. So that's the most complicated because you have to have these 4 independent groups, whereas you only need 2 groups for the experimental and the control condition. And you only need 1 group if you do the pre-test, post-test design. So those are the different kind of evaluation designs. All right. So training issues related to diversity. So the main themes are sexual harassment training and then workplace diversity and management, diversity management and training. So I have a little cartoon for our sexual harassment training that says, gee, I'm really sorry. You can sexually harass me back if you want. That's not the remedy for sexual harassment. And then this one just says, same moves, same clothes, same faces, same old ideas, try diversity. It's an advertisement for diversity that seems a little odd to me, but okay. So let's start with sexual harassment training. I've been through it enough. I can definitely teach it, that's for sure. So one of the things that we have to first start off with is the concept of like, what are the consequences of sexual harassment? Like what harm can come from sexual harassment? And by the way, I'm sorry, I call it harassment. I've heard people say harassment, but I say harassment. So there are widespread implications on work outcomes. People who are sexually harassed oftentimes have sort of psychological effects from that cause them to have difficulty focusing. Maybe they start to get angry because it feels like nobody's noticing or taking care of them. And so maybe they start to do some retaliatory things. There's a lot of things that can come. There are psychological outcomes, there are somatic outcomes where, hit my computer, where their bodies are actually showing symptoms. They're having stomach aches, headaches, sleepless nights that can cause them to then not come to work, things like that. Altogether, it has harm for the organization. And so it's in an organization's best interest to avoid their employees being sexually harassed. Training may be the best tool against harassment. I'm not sure, but it may be. I will argue some things. Research indicates that behavior modeling may help individuals become more sensitive to sexual harassment behaviors if they maybe can see some vignettes of people acting, in a vignette. It can help them to recognize, that what I thought maybe was just a joke, or that I thought was flirting, or that thing on the screen, I'm now being informed, okay, that's actually the receiver didn't see it the same way. There's a lot of research that shows that males and females view behaviors differently with respect for their potential to be actually sexually harassing behaviors. And so this is where I would like to argue training can be helpful, but it isn't necessarily. A lot of times, this is not always the case, but a lot of times sexual harassment goes from a male towards a female. That's not always the case, but in most cases, that's how it is. So that's what I'm going to talk about for a second. So males who see those behaviors differently than females do means that we've got a big disconnect between what might be the person who's doing something that is not intentionally harassing, but lands as harassing. And so sexual harassment training for a person who doesn't realize that this is harmful is going to fall on deaf ears. They don't know. Like they don't see anything that they've ever done. Their intention was never to be harassing. Now, having said that, there are harassers who are doing it to be mean. There are harassers that are doing it to put you in your place. There are harassers who are doing it to show dominance. And so those people, that's a whole other category. That is a whole other category. So, and I'm going to argue those people are very resistant to training because they're doing it to put other people in their place because of other things. It's like this sexual harassment is just standing in for what they're trying to do in general. So they're going to be pretty reluctant to be trained to stop doing that. And so I personally believe if anybody would let me design a sexual harassment training, I would focus on how a person who has been harassed should react. What are the steps that you should follow? Who should you report it to? How much time do you have? What is the limitation on the ability to report on that? What is the kind of documentation that you need to be keeping in order to make your claim? Does just showing body posture to the person who's harassing you have any impact on a harasser? I'm just going to cut to the chase and say, no, it doesn't. So don't think that just like acting like it's not funny is going to cause them to stop behaving like that. You need to follow these protocols. And so I think the training should be directed at the harassed rather than the harasser, because I think in a lot of ways, it doesn't really cause people who would be harassers not to harass. They either don't know it's harassing or they're doing it just to be mean. And it's a different thing. It's a different category. All right. I'm going to stop here and we'll come back and talk about diversity training.